Morning, everybody. Happy Hump Day, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie.
We've also got the world's best mug. Woohoo! We've got merchandise. Morning, Better for Britain. These mugs, by the way, which are Mirror branded and News Agenda branded, right? They will be made available to lucky viewers of this broadcast at Christmas time in return for some kind of competition or approval by me of something or other that you've done. Perhaps the best comments. I don't know. We haven't worked it out yet, but they're for fans. Put it that way. So you too stand a chance to win one of these News Agenda mugs. Woohoo! Some of our regular viewers, anyone who's got something fantastic to say. Maybe it'll just be the best comment that someone comes up with. Maybe it'll just be consistent commenting. Who knows? But you could have one of these, one of the lucky few. There's only a run of 20, so get in on it and keep asking us your comments today. This is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments, ask us whatever's burning a hole in your head, and we will answer them for you. And you stand a chance to win one of these. Jason hasn't got one yet. So what have we got
today?
Post,
isn't it, Susie?
In the post. Well, the Mirror has splashed on news that the Queen has cancelled her appearance. Morning, Maria. Has cancelled her appearance at next week's climate summit in Glasgow, which, considering the chance to meet her is probably all that got the coal-burning Aussies to attend in the first place, is a damn shame. And I'm sure we all wish Her Majesty well and get better soon. But this afternoon, after a pre-game Twix and a can of Sprite, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak will get to his feet and tell the nation that the economy is booming. He's found loads of extra money on this fantastic tree in the Bank of England's back garden, and he's going to spend. Now, Jason, in the past few days, we've had a lot of briefings from the Treasury about billions of pounds that they're going to spend, but only after the Chancellor's sat down are we going to be able to go through the paperwork and crunch the numbers. And it's already starting to look like some of this spending is going to be paid for by cuts. So what do we know so far about what he's going to be offering?
Well, I've never known a budget which has been so heavily pre-briefed. I mean, I'm not necessarily complaining about that, but it's fascinating that they on Saturday alone, the Treasury put out 6 press releases with everything from more ships flying the Union Jack flag to additional money for children and families. That's actually replacing money the Tories cut when they closed some shore start centres. But by the by, we'll move on from that.
It used to be that if journalists found out what was in the budget and published it, that the government would punish them.
There was a case of the Evening Standard releasing the budget by accident because they got a pre-trail by half an hour and they had to apologise. That was quite recent. Was the case of the Chancellor Hugh Dalton, who bumped into a journalist outside the House of Commons on a stroll and told the journalist what was in the budget. The journalist then put it in the Evening Chronicle, I think it was then, one of the London evening papers. Hugh Dalton then resigned as a result. Now, who cares about rules? We've got Boris Johnson in charge. They're for silly people rules. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the Speaker of the House of Commons wasn't too happy, was he? Because Rishi's been briefing it out.
But cross about it. Yeah.
Anyway, what are we going to have?
So the big, briefed flagship policy so far is a rise in the minimum wage to £9.50, but he's kind of obliged to do that anyway because that's what the Low Pay Commission recommended. Some form of pay rise, and I put that in inverted commas, for public sector workers. Now, here's the thing: we don't know how much it's going to be yet, and we have no idea how we're going to pay for it. Now, the real fear here is that it will come from existing departmental budgets. So, i.e., Department of Education, you've now got to give teachers a pay rise. That's the good news. Bad news, it comes from a budget for school building repairs, classroom materials, etc., etc. So we just don't know. As you said, that's a bit when we look for a small print, pretty bad, interestingly. As usual, there'll be lots of bits of kind of Sunakish, kind of Californian investing in R&D. Nouveau Rishi likes his kind of West Coast sunniness. What I always find interesting is, is he one of these kind of fake kind of gurus, kind of Tom Cruise type characters who kind of pops up and says, "I've got magic crystals," or is he actually a kind of a Silicon Valley kind of tech guru? I just don't know which one he is at the moment. He's kind of somewhere in between. He's kind of
he seems to have, every time he has one of these budgets, he does something ridiculous, which today involves white socks and sandals. We're getting to those later. Better for Britain. Don't interrupt my script, thank you. And he's already been talking about that we don't need to have free school meals because we're going back to a normal way of doing things, because the normal way of doing things appears to be starving children. So on the one hand, he's like you say, Mr. Californian guru, and on the other hand, he's like Victorian workhouse. People need to be threatened with and penalized for being poor in order to make them want to be rich, which is a bizarre ideology. Now, one of the things he's going to say today, and I quote, listener, today's budget begins the work of preparing for a new economy post-COVID, an economy of higher wages, higher skills, and rising productivity, of strong public services, vibrant communities, and safer streets, an economy fit for a new age of optimism. That is the stronger economy of the future. Now,
I'm so inspired, Susie.
That's exactly how he's going to deliver it as well.
Yeah,
I guarantee it.
Yeah, but really nice. Beautifully done.
That kind of like, woo, everything's great take, though, is that going to resonate with the ordinary people in the real world and people who are watching this broadcast who have just lost £20 a week universal credit, whose food and petrol prices have just gone through the roof, who have just been through 2 years of watching loved ones die, perhaps sicken in the long term, while Rishi has been throwing cash at Tory donors? That kind of tone, how's that going to go down?
Well, obviously it'll go down brilliantly today with the Tory backbenchers. They'll be really cheery by it, and I think it's fantastic because he's kind of, he's stemming off the inevitable. I mean, we know that in April, times are pretty tough anyway. It's going to get even worse when the new health and social care levy comes in. That's, we're talking hundreds of pounds off people's incomes a year. That matters. And we know that, food prices are going up. We keep getting daily warnings that products across the board are going to become more expensive. The latest one is from today's paper is that the makers of Dettol saying that's going to kind of suddenly go up in price. Incrementally, these little things matter. And we know that petrol is now an average of kind of £1.71, 72 at the moment, high cost forecourts.
I'm just avoiding petrol stations, just trying not to get anywhere near them. I don't want to see the prices. It's frightening.
Yeah, but it's one way to keep the queues down, because it's so extortionately expensive. So, all of these things are starting to hit people's family budgets. And then we'll be told we need to be cheerful and we're going to live our optimism and happiness and sunshine. And that's the real danger, is that Sunak sells a kind of great. He says, I'm really generous. This is going to be a wonderful life. And then we find out it's not a wonderful life. It's kind of, it's kind of horror on kind of on Main Street.
Yeah, it's kind of giving with one hand and taking with the other.
Mm.
Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the budget, or you've heard so far? What would you like Rishi to spend on? What would you like him to do about some of the cost of living crisis? Now, Mike says, since ministers have found out that Dido Harding's test and trace was a multi-billion pound failure, 37 billion pound failure, Mike, can we have some of our money back, please? I think I'm right in saying, Jason, that cash has been spent.
I'm sorry, Mike, you can't have anyone back because it's all gone to private firms. Mainly a lot of them who are private firms who happen to be friends of Tory MPs and other Conservative supporters. So no, they've got the money. You can knock on the door and ask politely, but I think they're saying no.
Yeah, you can see if they want to pay any tax on it.
Yeah,
you can ask them, and you can do the same thing probably with the sewage company, the water companies, and see if they feel like investing at all in the sewage system. Cashback says better for Britain. No. Now, one of the things that's going to happen, I reckon, is that Rishi is going to have to pull a rabbit out of the hat. So all the stuff that's been briefed, he has kept the best bit back because that's what you would do. He's kept the best bit back so he can announce it in Parliament, which will keep the Speaker happy. It will keep the backbenchers on their toes. It will give Labour a surprise because they can't respond to it as easily as they can stuff they've known about overnight. And it would lead the headlines. Oh, Rishi's doing this. What are the chances that might be a permanent increase to universal credit? If not 20 quid, maybe something else.
Now this is interesting because Andy Burnham was on radio this morning, going to Manchester, and he'd heard that there would be some movement on the universal credit. And our great colleague Dan Bloom about a month ago had a whisper of this as well, that they're going to maybe not necessarily kind of reverse the £20 a week cut, but there could be some kind of changing of the taper rate. As you know, at the moment, one of the problems of universal credit is when you start earning a little bit more, they take more away in benefits. So you actually, you lose 63 in the pound. So they could be changing that. But let's just see. I mean, it would be quite a U-turn, but you can understand that Tories have got a lot of red wall seats with a lot of claimants people in those seats who claim a universal.
I think you're breaking up a bit, Jason. I can't hear you very much. I hope so. Yeah, Jason's in his...
And Labour's been campaigning very hard, slightly on...
No. No, he's back. He's back. He's in. He's out. Jace, can you hear us?
I can hear you again. Sorry about that.
There you go. No, it's okay. Someone's obviously walked past your garden shed with their Bluetooth on or something.
Flow and...
We got the gist of it, don't worry. Now, Marie says, why has the minimum wage all of a sudden jumped to a living wage? Now, these are two different amounts, aren't they? So what's going on? He can answer it, but is he going to? And are we going to hear him if he does? Right, I think Jason is going to be temporarily ejected from the News Agenda broadcast and asked to rejoin, and that may just sort out his signal a little bit. Now, I don't know what he's going to tell us, Marie, about the minimum wage and the living wage. What we'll do is we'll come back to your question in a minute. But first off, if we can get the producer just to show again, we had that picture of Rishi Sunak walking onto the stage with a lovely blue background behind him. If we can flick it up again, now just have a quick look there at Rishi's trousers. You will see that they look too short for him, don't they? And the reason they are too short for him, allegedly, is that this man who's married to the daughter of a billionaire has his tailored suits intentionally cut a bit too short in the leg so that he looks taller because he's only 5'6". Now, I'm 5'6", and there's nothing wrong with being 5'6". Rishi's got a bit of a complex about it. So it's interesting to see that he insists on his suit legs, trying to, make himself look taller like he's Tom Cruise or something. Now, Jason, you're back. Can you hear us all? Can you talk clearly?
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's all right. Easy. Now, can you help Marie and her question of what's happening with the national wage and the minimum wage?
Yes. So George Osborne, incredibly sneaky, having originally opposed a minimum wage, then decided to rebrand it as a national living wage. But actually, that's
So George Osborne's rebranded it. So the national living wage, I think that Jason is talking about there, is actually the minimum wage. What everyone else says, that's your flat, basic, standard rate. And then what other people outside the government, when they talk about a real living wage, they're talking about the minimum amount you actually need to get by. And that's why the London living wage, for example, is a bit higher than in the rest of the country, because costs in London are a bit higher. At least they were before the pandemic. So I'm afraid Jason's frozen again. Right, Jace, are you back? George Osborne. No, Jason's gone. Jason's going to sort of reboot and come in again somewhere else. I hope we've answered your question, Marie. We're going to have to move on. Technical disasters ongoing. I think anyone needs a mug just for putting up with this, frankly. Now, what's more important probably is that this budget, at least in this house, is going to be known forever as the flip-flop budget. Rishi has been pictured in white socks and £95 flip-flops, or sliders as they're known amongst the cool kids, which don't have the little bit between your toes. There's a little picture there just on the left-hand side of him wearing white socks and his Palm Angels sliders. They cost 95 quid a pop, and he was wearing them while rehearsing his speech. Jason, have you got a pair of £95 flip-flops?
No, but I've got some slippers from H&M.
My daughter's got a pair of sliders. They were 5 quid at Asda, and that was about as much as I was prepared to spend on them. But is he going to be? Are we going to be able to call this like the flip-flop budget, because he's giving money with one hand and taking it with the other?
I prefer slipshod.
Ooh, okay. I can see there being an argument on the backbench design team overnight as people talk about which kind of headline they prefer. I'm happy with flip-flop. I think people are going to regard them as flip-flops rather than slippers, but who knows? We'll sort something out. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about Rishi's budget promises so far? How do you think he's going to be paying for them? Are you happy for there to be unrestrained spending in the way that he's talking about? Do you think there should be more cuts? Do you think there should be more spending? Do you think we should do something more on social care? Do you think we need some more radical ideas than the ones which are being suggested here? We'll have to wait and see, of course, what he's going to talk about when he gets up on his feet at 1:30 this afternoon. Keep looking at the Mirror's pages, because we will be carrying the budget speech live, and you will be able to find out exactly what's going on as it happens on the Mirror's Facebook video page. Now, there is some other stories in the news today, and inside on page 8, we have the news that, sewage U-turn, what a horrible thought. That there is the news that the Duke of Wellington, I kid you not that Duke of Wellington, this is a different Duke of Wellington, but it's the same family. He has taken on the Tories in what they're calling the Battle of Waterpoo. The subs on the backbench had fun last night, didn't they? Now, Jason, the Tories seem to have done a U-turn, or rather a U-bend on this one. What's happened?
Well, the Duke of Wellington, very nice man, Mr. Wellesley, who is a direct ancestor of the Waterloo man, he put an amendment down in the Lords last week saying that it's outrageous that the water companies are allowed to just put raw sewage, discharge, as they call it, into our rivers and seas. And they'll be doing it a lot. So the amount of discharges by the water companies has gone up from 200,000 last year to 403,000 this year. So obviously it was growing anger, because people quite like having clean water, and they like to be able to swim in nice clean seas, and they don't like seeing our rivers polluted and our fish dying, etc., etc. So he tabled an amendment saying, look, water firms need to stop doing this. The Tories voted against it. And then they didn't kind of realize that this might actually make people angry. And suddenly you couldn't actually go on social media without somebody saying, why are the Tories allowing water firms to pump sewage into my rivers? At first, they tried putting out a message saying, we're not actually doing that. It's too expensive to make them stop it immediately. But we are we are persuading them to actually come up with a plan to stop doing it. And they thought that would wash.
It doesn't wash.
Yeah, and then they realised that actually they were on completely wrong side of the argument of this. They were getting a complete mauling from not just the kind of people who don't normally vote Conservative, but a lot of people do vote Conservative. And that's when Mo Lambell started panicking. They were thinking about things like Cheshire and Amersham. That's a by-election they lost last year. And you could see them going, oh my God, what have we done now? So they rushed out a U-turn yesterday ahead of a second vote on this, which they hope would be enough. But it's still saying we want the water firms to stop discharging sewage as quickly as reasonably possible. Now, that's not really good enough, is it? That's saying, if you've been, we're really nice to you, will you stop doing it in kind of, when you can get round to it, if you're kind of be asked, basically. Now, a bit of background here. This is a major problem from privatization. So basically, water companies are a monopoly. They kind of create massive profits from having a monopoly, which they pay dividends to shareholders. Now, in the last 30 years, they've paid £60 billion in dividends to shareholders. That is money which could have gone on repairing our crumbling sewage system, so they didn't have to discharge sewage into our seas and waters.
Yeah, but they didn't. They put it in their pockets instead. Now, anybody who's had children in their home for more than about 5 seconds will know that once you've got them trained to actually sit on the toilet to use it, that's fairly easy. The difficult bit is persuading them they need to flush it, having used it. And if I said to my 5-year-old, next time I walked into the toilet and found something unpleasant waiting for me, well, look, just come up with a plan on how you're going to flush it in a few years' time. That would be a bad idea. And if I then if people came into my house and said, what the hell are you doing? Teach her to flush the toilet. And then I said, well, okay, we're going to change that. And I would like you to flush the toilet, daughter, as soon as is reasonably possible for you. Again, that would be terrible parenting. It would be unhygienic. It'd just be grim. It'd be grim for everybody who's got to sit and look at it at some point. Literally sit and look at it. So I just can't help thinking that the Conservatives have never had to toilet train anybody, these MPs. I don't think they've ever actually toilet trained their own children, perhaps, because they would know that perhaps sewage and it floating about is a bad idea. I also doubt they've ever gone swimming anywhere off the English coast on their staycations, which they're encouraging everybody else to take. They prefer to have lovely pools in seaside villas, unless, of course, the Mediterranean, unless, of course, the sea is shut and you're Dominic Raab. That happens too. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about Poogate? Do you think that the fault is with privatisation? Because, part of the issue here perhaps is also that with increasing amounts of rainfall, our drainage system is being affected by climate change, which means that things have to get flushed out of the system more likely. And they'll get flushed out by huge amounts of rainwater anyway. There are some kinds of leaks that are almost uncontrollable because our sewage system was designed so long ago. There's also the issues of, especially around cities and towns, fatbergs, people chucking the wrong stuff down the toilet, blocks up the sewers. It means when there is a heavy rainfall, everything gets gumped and floods out the emergency hatch, as it were, and it goes into the sea or rivers untreated. It happens in the Thames, it happens all around the British coast, and there's an issue with that. Although it's interesting, Jason, I saw a picture the other day, a map of sewage outfalls in the United Kingdom, and there weren't any incidents in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And the water companies in those places have been regulated in such a way they have to put the money back into investment.
Yeah, which is, and the other side of it is, only 14% of our rivers in England are classified as being in good ecological condition, i.e. clean. That's just 14%. And one of the problems we have is that the Environment Agency, which is meant to be the watchdog for checking that our rivers are clean and making sure the water firms don't pump raw sewage unnecessarily or illegally, as often happens, into our rivers, it's been cut to the bone. They've lost 20% of their staff since 2013. And they're carrying out almost half the number of inspections they were. And some of those inspections are they only they're not monitoring it fully, but just doing kind of occasional checks. So, again, we're coming back to the Tories privatise the water industry. They allow these firms to make massive profits. A lot of these firms are owned by foreign companies. If you take Thames Water, you have to go 7 companies up before you find your actual owner. And a lot of these, they have subsidiaries in kind of tax havens, which is very common with water companies. And at the same time, they then cut the money to the watchdog, which is meant to police these water firms. So we end up with this situation we're now, which is that, you know, we are killing our wildlife, our beaches are dirty, and our rivers aren't safe. It's a scandal.
Well, it's just quickly before we move on to good news. This isn't total Tory bashing on this broadcast, because one of the issues you've got here is that there'll be massive public support for taking the water companies back into public ownership. This is a natural resource. It falls from the sky. We need it to live. It's got to be healthy and clean in order for this country to be healthy and productive and safe. It's a matter of national security as well as national safety and stability in our economy and everything else. And yet the Labour Party, if they came forward right now and said, we're going to take the water companies back into public ownership, they'd get a fair bit of support for that, I would have thought. And yet the Labour Party are backing away from the idea of renationalising some of these industries, despite the support of it. Are they ever going to see sense on this issue, Jason?
Keir Starmer is incredibly cautious on this. I mean, he kind of, I think there definitely would go for some sort of not-for-profit model for some of the utilities. I think water's a case where, you know, we're about the only major developed country which has actually privatized its water system. I kind of think, you know, there's a real case of taking back into public ownership. One, because it's such an obvious monopoly, so there's no space for competition. So how does privatization work in that sort of situation? And two, because as you say, it's a natural resource. I think what Keir Starmer's worried about is saying we're going to do kind of blanket renationalisation across the board for every single utility. But all the polls show that's incredibly popular.
It's incredibly popular. If you care, if you're watching, just say it. Say it this afternoon at the budget box, and that you'll get all the headlines away from Rishi, and that'll really annoy him. We won't even be talking about his flip-flops anymore. Right, okay. If you can get into the comments, ask us something. We're going to try and use them. There's a bit of a technical issue with comments coming into the software we use to stream this. So if you're commenting and we can't get it up, that's sorry. If we can't get the question up on the screen, then that's why. But keep asking them, and we'll see if we can. Now, there is some good news. There is some pleasant stuff knocking around. It's not all about poo. And here it is. I'm in a sudden burst of sunshine. That's the good news. No, on page 27, above the picture of a sunbathing cat, which is just worth buying the paper just to look at yourself, is the news that one lucky stamp collector, a chap called Alan Hollyoak, has managed a 6 million % return on initial investment. 6 million %, Jason, by finding a 1 penny black stamp from 1840, which is one of only ever 3 ever found from the very first sheet of stamps published by the post office. And now it might fetch £6 million at auction. Now, he didn't pay a penny. Someone else did that in 1840. He probably paid a lot more for it fairly recently. But, Jason, does this prove that we should all be investing 66 pence now on a second-class stamp and leaving it to our great-grandchildren to cash in 150-odd years' time?
I think our grandchildren will ask, what's a stamp?
Yeah. Well, you say that, but my daughter wrote a letter to the Queen the other day, and she was highly delighted to put it in the post box. So perhaps there is still reason for using it for special occasions.
I know. It's quite. It's when I give talks and I say when I started out to be a journalist, I wrote lots of letters applying for jobs, and the students look at me and go, "What's a letter? Why didn't you use email or upload your CV onto it like we do?"
Why don't you just send them a YouTube link to all the stuff you've done? People, what? Now, Marie says, I wonder if the first ever email is going to sell for £6 million. Probably not. I'd be surprised. Now, Marie says, going back to the pay rise that may be suggested for public sector workers in the budget this afternoon, I wonder if council workers will get their pay rise. We need to value workers more and make it pay. They have ended the pay freeze, Jason, but we're not going to know about any rise until next year. And that rise is going to be contingent upon a massive increase in national insurance, which means you may lose everything you get paid extra anyway. Is that right?
Well, this is one, but they haven't told us how much any pay rise, I use that phrase very cautiously, could be. They haven't told us how it would be paid for, so it could come from existing budget. And they haven't told us, you know, when you've got inflation creeping up towards 5%, whether that make any difference to people's incomes. And that's before you take in the additional health and kind of social care levy to pay for social care and the other rising costs of living. So it could well be that council workers do get a small amount of extra money probably won't compensate for the almost a decade of pay freezes they've suffered, and it could all be wiped out by inflation. Other than that, I wish I had some cheery news for you.
Well, I think council workers, whatever few pennies they actually manage to get in the next few months, I think what they should do, Marie, to be honest, is go and spend it on stamps, and just hope, fingers crossed, that they manage to get one that's worth a bomb, because that's probably the only chance we're going to get through the next few years without all suffering a little bit. Thank you for joining us, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Sorry about the technical issues.
Sorry, guys.
It's not all Jason. We'll hopefully we'll do better next week. See you again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Bye-bye.